A big part of my career has been looking at the therapeutic value of the 12 steps because the 12 steps really have harnessed some powerful psychological forces that creates an amazing change in our life. What is that change? Well, the truth is that the 12 steps are engineered to help us achieve emotional sobriety, to achieve true independence of spirit, to achieve autonomy, to learn how to take care of ourselves. These are things that we don't know. Emotional sobriety really helps us learn how to have a healthy relationship, how to have union with the preservation of our integrity, how to cooperate with integrity. Most of us get lost in our relationships. Most of us do a lot of things we don't want to do. We don't really know how to show up in a good way. Emotional sobriety is about learning to have healthy relationships. What did you get out of it? When you read that letter, what stands out for you, Mary?
When he's talking about adult love, whatever the
Yes.
heck that is, he says, the healing circuit, once you have the healing circuit and the dependencies are broken, then you have a glimmer of what adult love looks
Yeah.
like.
Yeah. And it's a great concept because other people are using the term mature love, adult love. I've heard authentic love. And it is a love that comes later in our life. Because
Yeah.
when we're young, there's too many expectations. And even as we get older, it's not that we purge ourselves of all of those things. But what happens is as we start to get that appropriate and honest relationship with reality, we realize that a lot of the fantasies we have about what a relationship should be like are just fantasies. And then you have a chance at having a real relationship. And
And
that's
they
the good
drop
news.
off if you keep
If
opening to it
you're
and stay
right,
willing.
that's so true because this Dr. Miller writes a very interesting thing in his book, Intimate Terrorism. He says, every relationship will go through a phase of disillusionment. Is that we lose the innocence of our youth and we develop the innocence of experience. And that innocence of experience is the richness of that I to thou connection that we have with someone. So it was very good. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary.
So tonight, Roger is going to kick us off on, to me, one of the most powerful chapters I wrote in this book. It was very moving because it really brought me back to some very, very, very moving and unbelievably intimate times with a client that was facing, to me, one of the most horrendous things that we could face as parents in this world. So, Roger, I'll turn the meeting over to you tonight, and hopefully next week I'll be up and ready to also chime in on this.
I will count on it, Alan, and thank you, man, for making it here tonight. I certainly was not expecting that. I would also point out, since our theme tonight is accepting what is, that we've all just seen a wonderful example of that. In reading the full letter, I was so happy, Alan and Tom, that you did not intervene, right? You accepted what was happening, what is happening, rather than trying to make it line up with some other idea. And Mary, I got a lot out of hearing the parts of that letter read that we don't ordinarily read. So I want to point that out, that we've all just seen a nice example of accepting what is, rather than operating from other ideas and shoulds. So thank you all for being here. And thank you, Al, for creating this meeting several years ago, like 4 years ago at this point. Accepting What Is, Chapter 8 in Allen's book, 12 Essential Insights for Emotional Sobriety. I can't help but start with this, as opposed to what I've written. It's occurred to me a number of times that there is a pathway, there is, to always, at every time, in every situation, with every person, to be able to accept what is. And here's the way you do that. You have such perfect control over everything that goes on in the world, every person that exists in the world, every moment of time that exists, that everything you experience and that happens lines up perfectly with how you'd like it to be. That's the solution. Not very practical, right? But that would be it if we had that kind of power and if we had that kind of control. But in the real world, why is it that accepting what is, accepting reality as best we can perceive it and understand it as it is so difficult so much of the time? Well, part of helping us understand that is remember that when we talk about reality, we're talking about both the reality of the outer world and the reality of our inner world, not just one or the other. Why can't accepting reality be as easy and natural to us as breathing or taking a drink of water? And I use biological examples like those because I believe the answer about why it's so difficult lies in two things. The first is that we are biological, conscious, thinking organisms, which means that we have needs, physical needs, such as the need for oxygen and food and water, and psychological needs, such as the need to be loved and to give love, the need for acceptance, for belonging, community, for security, safety, and so on. And what happens when these biological and psychological needs are not adequately met? We experience distress. If it's our need for oxygen that's not met, we experience very immediate and very intense distress. If it's our need for love, the distress may not be as pressing or as powerful or as immediate in the moment, but it's still very real to us. So when our needs are not met, we experience pain. We don't much like this experience. It's a signal to us that we're in trouble, that we must find some way to end or escape the pain and to get to safety or to get our needs met in some other way as quickly as possible so that the pain will be relieved. We are each unique organisms in all the universe. No one is exactly like each one of us is. Even if I have an identical twin, the experiences and the learnings I've had in my life and the meanings I've given to those experiences will not be the same as my twins. Yet it's also true that as human beings, we have much in common. In fact, we have much in common with many other animal species as well, especially primates, but also with most other mammals. And one of those commonalities is we don't like pain, whether it be physical or emotional. And yes, there's much evidence from primatology that other animals do experience not only physical pain, but also emotional pain, if their brains are sufficiently evolved, including the pain of loss as just one example. If we can't find a way to readily ease our pain and a way to meet the need or what we are having, we won't like the reality that we're experiencing. We won't be able to accept what is, either in outer reality or in our inner reality, or both. And we don't just come to dislike fear and pain for ourselves, but the prospect of pain for those we love can cause us even more distress than our own pain does. So as Tom mentioned last week in talking about the pervasive role of fear in our lives, and that if we're looking for the root, as he put it, the basement of why we are motivated to engage in so many self-protective, defensive attitudes, words, and actions in life, look at what we're afraid of. If you think about it, fear is almost always about experiencing some type and some degree of pain, discomfort, or distress, either for ourselves or, as I just said, for someone we care about. That pain or discomfort can take many forms, be it physical or emotional. Physical pain is just that. We're hurt or injured, and pain signals our body and tells us to escape the source of the pain and to take action to try to heal it. Emotional pain and distress can take so many forms: loss, disappointment, guilt, shame, anger, fear, dread, injury to our ego and our self-image, fear of rejection. I could go on with hundreds of other descriptions of the forms of discomfort and pain that we experience. So in a way, pain and our fear of it and our desire to avoid it is at the root of why it's so hard for us to accept reality as it is. And with human beings, there's one other element I'd like to add that puts us at odds with reality and in a place of fear. We can not only be in conflict with reality in the present, but we have memories and we have imaginations that can envision the future. We can find our minds, and do find our minds, returning over and over and over again to painful memories of the past. And we can use our imaginations to envision all manner of distress and disappointment in the future. We don't even need to be in a painful situation or distress in the present to activate all the neurological pathways and release all the stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline that happen when we are actually in the present, in a reality that is causing us distress. We can create that reality in our own minds. Allen begins this chapter on accepting what is with a very moving portrait, as he was just referring to, of his work with his client, Charlene, and how pain that feels and is truly unbearable stops us from aligning with and accepting reality. He describes Charlene and her daughter Emily, and how Charlene lost Emily due to kidney cancer. He describes in detail the process of grief and fear and rage she experienced and expressed in her therapy sessions with him, as well as going to her recovery meetings and working with her sponsor, that Charlene went through gradually over a long period of time. He describes how much anger she needed to go through toward anything and everything, toward AA and all the advice she was getting that she wasn't able to utilize, toward God, toward the cancer, toward anything and everything that had anything to do with the loss and the unbearable pain of losing her daughter. When life is that much at odds with what we need and what we want, the conflict can feel so painful that it's insurmountable. And if that conflict involves, as hers did, someone that we love deeply and deeply value, there is no simple or easy way to find acceptance of that reality. Of course, there are all kinds of levels of realities that we don't like. If we go to the grocery store and they're out of our favorite condiment, we might experience a moment or two of irritation or frustration, but we let it go. It doesn't matter. it's not a big deal. But if it's someone we love or something else in life that we really value, that's important and meaningful to us, that's where the task of accepting what is becomes an incredibly difficult emotional journey. At those times, we need other people. We need to be willing to turn to other people, which we may or not have the capability and willingness to do in order to get support and help. Yes, we need to provide as much as we can, but as Herb often emphasizes, we also need mentors, counselors, friends, family, others that we can turn to who are able and willing to care, to listen to our experience, and to find ways to give us the support and caring that we need. Eventually, most of the time, if we have the time we need and we're willing, which is the most difficult part, to face the pain and all the forms of pain, including anger and resentment and shame that we can face, we will come closer and closer. We will make progress to accepting the reality that we're in, to accepting the reality that's occurred. So it's not a great mystery from my perspective why we so often find ourselves at odds with reality, why we find it impossible to accept life as it is, other people as they are, events as they've happened. Self-acceptance allows us to begin to untie the knots we have each been tied up in as children and continue to tie ourselves up in as adults. For one person, those knots get expressed as always being angry or irritable. For another, the expression may be depression or anxiety or constant approval seeking or excessive self-reliance or some other coping style. Let me say briefly, describe the developmental description. And Allen has talked about this at length, and so have I. When we experience the needs that we have as children, the primary ones that he's talked about are love, acceptance, and belonging. And those needs are not met. We feel we can't deal with or cope with the pain of that. It's just too much. So as he's described, we then set about trying to figure out who we need to be in order to get the love, acceptance, and belonging that we want. In that process, we begin to lose touch with what we really feel, with what we really like, with what we really want, with who we really are. In the course of that process, through our childhood and through our adolescence, we tend to move in either one of two directions, either toward compliance with the shoulds that we perceive and the expectations that we perceive, or defiance of those, or we just turn inward in depression and discouragement. But until we begin to become aware, as you've heard us say so many times, that the roles and shoulds that we've adopted are not meeting our needs, are not helping us feel happier, more fulfilled, or later on as adults, helping us develop more self-respect and more self-esteem. Until we become aware of that, we're not able to change it. And that's part of what we mean by acceptance. Nathaniel Branden writes about acceptance in 3 levels. The first level is in my gut, in my deepest parts of my being. Am I for myself or against myself in my life? The second level is the ability to become aware of and face, and this is another meaning of the word accept, realities that we don't want to face, that we don't want to feel, that we don't want to experience. And as Allen talks about it in this chapter, acceptance is an active experience. It involves us making choices to move toward, very often, what we at an emotional level just want to avoid, what we just want to not look at. So it's not a passive process, it's an active willingness to move toward the sources of our pain. As we become aware of this, one of the biggest obstacles, because as I said, none of us are happy about and eager about the idea of moving toward our pain. One of the most common things we encounter is an experience of resistance, a part of ourself that says no. And as Allen talks about at length in this chapter, if we just add messages to ourselves at that time that we shouldn't be feeling resistant, that we shouldn't be feeling this, that we shouldn't be feeling that, those only become additional obstacles to our progress. The way we make progress with our ability and our capacity to deal with what is we admit to ourselves and to others the truth of our experience in the moment. And if that experience is resistance, and if that experience is, I don't want to go there, that's a beautiful place to begin. Our shoulds and our judgments can convince us otherwise, but they're mistaken. Accepting what is, remember, I said applies to our internal reality as well as the external world and events and people and circumstances. So in this sense, if we simply begin with where we are, we're going to find the ability to make progress, because as we open up about the resistance that we're feeling and the part of us that says no, as we stop being an adversary, as Nathaniel Brandon talked about it, to that feeling, we begin to open up. We begin to let go. Why? Because maybe for the first time in our lives, since we were very young children, we're starting to give voice to the truth of our experience. We're starting to give voice to what's actually going on. We talk a lot, and you've heard us talk a lot, that the way through a problem we're having is to own the problem we're having, to own the behaviors that we're engaging in, to own the feelings that we're having. That's what begins the process of setting ourselves free. And as we become freer, we begin to be less scared. Why? Because we're starting to feel who we are in a deeper way. And that begins to give us a solidness and a kind of self-support that maybe we haven't experienced our entire lives. And where did it come from? It came from beginning to speak the truth about what we're perceiving and what we're experiencing. That has a lot of value for us. Right away, we'll start to experience ourselves differently. It'll also impact our level of emotional sobriety and our level of emotional dependency. As I start to become more accepting toward more parts of who I am, I feel stronger within myself. As I begin to let go of the belief that it's not okay for me to want what I want, it's not okay for me to feel what I feel, it's not okay for me to ask for what I want or like, or express what I dislike or don't want, as I start to realize that's not true. Those are beliefs I formed about life and about myself growing up that are false beliefs. And keep in mind when I say that, part of who we are and what we want is to care about other people, is to feel of value to other people. So it's not just about me and my self-centeredness. When I talk about feeling free to become myself, it actually opens up lots of possibilities for becoming a much more caring and loving person toward others, because I'm no longer nearly so afraid of others disagreeing with me or disapproving of me. I'm no longer nearly so afraid of differences. So that's the reason that as we begin to become more self-accepting, and as we begin to express the truth about ourselves as it's situationally appropriate to do so and makes sense, we progress with emotional sobriety, and our emotional dependency begins to go down. So I will stop with that for tonight and invite my colleagues to come in and share their thoughts about accepting what is.
Hey, I
Hey.
forgot Herb is not going to be here in February, so it's the three of us tonight, the Three Musketeers.
Okay.
It's just
Okay.
the three of us. Oh, sorry.
We could make it if we try.
Herb's right
Oh
there.
my
and
God!
right away.
I was saying no one is coming, and then
Who's
look at what
that guy?
happened.
This is an apparition. Herb,
I know.
can you
he's-
It's just
you s-
next week I'm not here.
Oh,
you
okay,
speak?
got it.
He's an apparition who
Yes,
speaks.
wonderful. Then the stress is off my leg.
Take it away, guys.
Well, I'll go. Thank you, Roger. That was it's, and thank you, Alan, for this chapter. I love this chapter, and I love your book. And but this chapter in particular, because I've worked with parents whose children have died, and I'm not a parent, but I would have guessed this before, but I have witnessed it in the people I've treated. That is the most horrendous thing that could possibly happen to somebody, as far as I can concerned. Having even spent lots and lots of intimate conversations with these people, I still can't even get my head around what it must feel like. But one of the things I learned from working with those people is how different, and it goes to what we're talking about with emotional sobriety, and with what Roger's talking about the choices that we have. It's such a wide range of responses. It's like the people that I've worked with who've lost, in the cases I'm talking about, in all three cases, they're young adult children. The adults, the parents could not have reacted and responded more differently from one another, sometimes in the same couple, but mostly across families. And you really, I really got to witness in one particular case, just a miraculous empowerment that grew out of the grief. It was just that. Well, I'll just take it to what I was going to say about this with Roger. It's like, we don't control anything except ourselves. This is one of the things, emotional sobriety, focusing on emotional sobriety, and doing one of my favorite things was reading the philosophy of Stoicism. Bring me to this one point, which is the only thing we control is ourselves, period. And not even entirely that. But the thing I have learned in the last couple of years doing this is, I've always known, or in recovery, I've always known we're totally responsible, and we choose how we respond to what happens to us. That's what being a non-victim is. But what this work to me brings home, and what Alan's chapter brings home, what brings home, is the internal thing. You said you talked about the outer world and the inner world, Roger, at first. It's like, we have not only the ability, but we have the responsibility to choose how we interpret what happens, to choose how we interpret the world around us. And it's like, that is the most powerful, as far as I'm concerned, that's the most powerful thing we have. and it's one of the most difficult challenges. And the thing I wrote down in the middle of my page that, for acceptance, accept what is that one of the hardest things to accept is simply this sentence: this is temporary. I am temporary. Everything is temporary. One of the things this is one of the reasons that I love Stoicism, because these Stoics, they don't miss a chance to remind us all we're going to be dead soon. And at first that was really unsettling for me, and now it's like I kind of agree with some of the things I read, which is that everybody should spend a little bit of time every day contemplating their mortality. And what that is it's not morbid. It's contemplating that, just getting in touch with our temporariness, and whether you believe about yourself and your spirit, but the life we're living right now, it's temporary. It's everything ends. And having done all the work on the fear, putting the fear book together, and looking at all the different things that people are afraid of, that's the thing people are most afraid of, is we're the only species on the planet who actually lives in fear of the nature of life, which is true, but it's also got some humor to it there. It's like, we hate change, and we're scared to death of uncertainty. What's the only thing certain about life? It's like change. That's all. So we live in fear. This is truly the human neurosis. But I love the idea of this work that we're doing, so that we can get together, because I can't hold on to these thoughts. This is temporary. I'm responsible for interpreting what's going on, as Bill says he says in many different ways in his letter. Basically, if I'm distressed, I'm interpreting things wrong. I'm making a mistake with my interpretation. I got to go in and do that. I can't hold on to any of these things without community, without all of you. And we do that together. And I don't know if that's put together so well, but that's my response to what you were saying, Roger. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you. My name is Herb, and I'm an alcoholic. Yeah, I meant, Alan, I won't be here next week on the 15th, that's all. And this is such an important concept. Thank you, Roger, very much and the point is, and it was made to me when I was 5 years sober, going through the inventory for the first time with somebody who knew what they were doing. And we came to this third column in the resentment inventory. And as a result of many, many hours of both reflection on my actual history and thoughts and feelings about it and perceptions about it, and then sitting down with this man who was clearly objective about reality and had had the experience of penetrating the curtain of the shoulds and the beliefs, he was able to help me to see that my beliefs were corrupt. They were delusional. The lenses through which I looked are compromised. Now, I hope you can hear that. The lenses through which I look are distorted. Therefore, anything I look through the lens to see, I'm seeing distorted. And our whole culture and our family of origin, etc., sets this all up. We don't know it because it's the lenses through which we look. It's the only way, and therefore we look at our source of our suffering. We get underneath as the source of the suffering to kind of see what's the truth. And that's really what you were talking about. What's the truth? Reality is the truth. Mm-hmm. Reality is objective. I have 4 words for it. Reality is absolute. Reality is universal. Reality is non-negotiable, and reality is immutable. Like principles, the principle of gravity. It doesn't care what I think or feel or want or know or say or need or want anything. It just is. And reality is like that. Now, I could not see that at 48 years old, 5 years sober, with a background of reflection. In the monastery I was in for 7 years, every month on the first Saturday, we spent the day meditating and thinking and writing about death for the very reason Tom mentioned, to
Mhm.
keep up perspective on the temporariness of it.
Mhm.
Now, this is not going to help in the situation that Allen writes about in the book. You have to be much more tender than philosophical and principles and objective conversation. Jesus, I mean, that wouldn't be helpful at all. But the truth is, if you're coming from that experience, that the curtain needs to part so that I can see that there is a flow, and that's what Mary read. Thank you for reading that, by the way, Mary, because that's my favorite part that I think you stressed, or maybe I saw it because I like it, and that's that healing circuit paragraph. And Roger had talked about, so what is adult love? And then there's a correlation between those things, which I'm not going to make right now. But challenge yourself to read that healing circuit and find out, what did Bill mean by that? You can figure it out by just reading it carefully and meditating it on carefully. What is that adult love? What is the healing circuit? What is emotional sobriety? Seeing reality as it is. And I'm glad Tom modified one of his statements about the only thing we control is ourselves. But he did modify it, because we don't control ourselves. We don't. We influence our effort and have no control over the outcome. We influence reality, we influence circumstances, we influence other people, but there's no control. And taking responsibility to see the truth of what are the principles, to see what is reality, the truth objectively. That's a challenge that I can refine, and those lenses over time as I make mistakes and I correct mistakes, because I direction from people who have wisdom of correcting a lot of mistakes. And that's the community that you guys were talking about. This is pivotal to living life with a sense of joy. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Herb and Tom and Roger, for once again another very insightful and cogent discussion of this chapter. You know, as I said before, you know, if you start to look at the relationship between the insights, they are really building a consciousness of freedom. That's our goal here, is we're really striving to develop a new consciousness. And as Herb said earlier, is that your consciousness determines what kind of a lens you're going to look at life through. And that consciousness, as we know, is influenced by so many different forces. It's not just one thing, although some may be a bit more important than others. But that lens and becoming aware of it, it's so hard because it is your reality. And see, that's the thing that happens here. You know, you were talking, Roger, about before, is like, well, what gets in the way of accepting? And clearly pain is a big issue, because the things we don't want to accept are very painful realities. But behind that lack of acceptance of reality, there's also some ideas that make accepting that reality very different. As Herb was pointing out, the source and the source of our suffering, right? It's you know, it's like cutting into a piece of tiramisu. There's so many layers here.
Yeah.
And once you expose one thing, it's going to lead to something else. And that's, I think, part of what the exciting thing is about this whole journey in emotional sobriety for me, is it's about, you know, really activating and stoking that curiosity to continue to look at our lives and be amazed at what we're discovering. This is an amazing life we're all living. Every person's, Dr. Polster says, every person's life is worth a novel. If you sit down with someone and you just sit with that person, we're amazing creatures, what we've experienced, no matter what it is. So one of the things that I am hoping by writing this book is I'm getting people interested in themselves again in a very different way. And be able to look at yourself from stepping outside of what you really think is right, and what you think things have to be, and discovering something that might allow you to have a different experience in your life and more freedom. So thanks, Raj. How was
Thanks,
that for
Al.
being on? How was that for being on Oxy? Was that all right?
Extremely impressive. Extremely impressive.
Not bad.
Alan, I want to
Are
add
you,
a couple.
are you aware that you were dancing during that?
I was not aware of that.
And you were dancing mostly with your new hip and leg. That was the
Yes,
really
that's right.
impressive part,
Yeah.
that you can't even feel
It's
it.
going to be a while before that leg gets danced on. I'll tell you that.
A couple other things I want to mention that came back to me. I had mentioned that Brandon writes about 3 levels of self-acceptance. I mentioned, are we for ourselves or against
Yeah.
ourselves fundamentally? Are we willing to look at what we don't want to look at and
Yeah.
experience that process? And the third that I did not get to is the one we usually think of about being self-accepting. How good of a friend am I to myself? How much of a supporter and an ally is the word you use, Alan, in your chapter. And I love how you talked about, yeah, it's partly about the pain, but it's about much more than that. It's about the beliefs behind the pain.
Yeah.
One of those beliefs is about the pain, that I can't
That's right.
handle the
I
pain.
can't handle it. That's a big
That's
lie.
a really big belief a
You're
lot
right,
of the time,
Raj.
because we're coming from a childhood perspective.
Well, how many
about
times
that.
have you and I heard that if we're working with someone that's been afraid to experience their sadness, that they'll never come out of it?
That's many times. So thank you guys all. I
Good
so
discussion,
appreciate you.
guys.
Yeah.
Mhm.
We've got a few minutes left. We'll get some shares in here, but yeah, I'm sure Herb's heard this a lot of times with resistance to 4th step inventories and examination, right? I'm afraid to open up that can of worms, right? And start exploring. And really it's once you get past the worms, there's some really good stuff in there.
Does someone need to believe in God to successfully overcome addiction? Well, the way I like to think about what the program does, it connects us to who we really are. And what does that mean? Well, there's this incredible force in you and I, this growth force. It's the force that moved us from crawling to walking. You wanted to take those first steps. And when you fell, and you fell a lot of times, you didn't let your failures stop you. You picked yourself up, you learned from it. And how many times did you fail before you walked? You failed as many times as you needed to. You see that force, I call it a biological imperative, a psychological imperative, a spiritual imperative. It's moving you towards wholeness. It's moving you to be what you can be. Just like in the acorn is all the information it needs to become an oak tree. In you is all the information you need to become you. Become a you that can cope with life and to deal with whatever you need to deal with to be okay. And that's what I'll talk about in my new book, The 12 Essential Insights for Emotional Sobriety.